Of abominable things today. We only have 2 pages left of the material that I put out, and I think we'll be able to comfortably get through that, at least most of it, if not all of it, and we won't spend any more time with it. We're going to get back into Matthew chapter 24. That's really where the whole point of this study has come from. But as I was doing additional research on the word and looking at where the word to'abah, meaning abomination, was found, I found that it was obviously pretty riddled throughout Solomon's writings in Proverbs. And I think it would be pertinent for us to understand at least a couple of different passages that I put on here for us so that we could really have a better understanding of something you've heard me quote from, Proverbs 6. It's often commented on and quoted in a lot of other people's sermons. There's some pretty well-known passages in this area, and so I thought putting it all in context and looking at some of it, understanding some of the teachable points out of that would be good for us. The word to'abah for abomination is found 22 times, and I know this is going to seem like a simple connection, but it's found 22 times throughout the book of Proverbs, and there happens to be 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And when I noticed this little simple coincidence, what I always think of and what I'm always reminded of is that the Hebrew alphabet and the building blocks of its creation, right, the letters in the alphabet, are, the foundational building blocks of a language that God chose to communicate His word in. So they are the building blocks of that. And whenever I see something that has, like that number of occurrences or something, it always leads me to believe that what that seems to signify is that in our levels of expression as well, in the expression of our character and our mind, our thinking, our behavior towards God and towards other people, in every building block of it, we have the capacity to believe something, act in a way, or present ourselves in a way that's either abominable in this case, or effective in life on either a positive or a negative stream. And as we've been studying, I bring that up simply because as we've been studying the word for abomination, I would hope, even though we've broken it up into a few weeks here, that this is really what we would see is that the ways of thinking that we can have and the ways of behavior that we have towards one another are really what is spiritually signified throughout a lot of this. There are certain things, like certain foods we could eat that God considers an abomination, certain practices of other nations that He refers to as an abomination that we shouldn't take on, and other things, but there are also a lot of other ways of thinking. And Solomon in Proverbs definitely capitulates that idea in much greater detail and spends a lot of time talking about things that are considered abominable. And every one of them is an action or a behavior of some sort. So we're just going to look at a few different things here and just talk a little bit about some Hebrew words and their definitions to have a little bit another of an idea as to what some of these things might mean. The first use the word to'abah for abomination is found in Proverbs 3, verse 32. It says here, for the crooked or devious man, depending on what translation you're looking at, for the crooked or devious man is an abomination to the Lord, but he is intimate with the upright. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what a couple of the words mean here. The word for either crooked or devious is the word lose, which we spelled L-U-Z. And it means, the word lose, and what this means, so like somebody who's wicked, there's a specific Hebrew word, a rasha, is a wicked person. A devious person, and we looked at the word devious, and I don't remember exactly what it is, but an earlier description of something from the Torah that was an abomination is people who act deviously, and that was a different word than this word lose. This word lose it means to transpose or to transfer something. It also means, and this is a process or something that would happen in the process of transposing or transferring something, it also means to abandon or to divest yourself of something. And so what, the translator looking at this word and seeing this, what they're translating here as devious is pretty fitting. Crooked is the one definition that I used here. Devious is what I had in other translations that I looked at. But really what it's talking about here that God finds as an abomination to Him is somebody who would transpose one thing for another. Especially if you have an understanding of the first initial foundational thing that God would prepare for your life or your relationship with Him. And to transpose or to transfer that one thing for another, to divest yourself of commitment, to abandon the first God that you love, right? a lot of this language is stuff that is used. What is the problem with the church? They abandoned their first love. That was one of the terminology. That's part of the terminology used in Revelation. It's part of the terminology used, I think, in another passage of the New Testament, because it comes out of the Torah, talking about the Israelites divesting themselves and abandoning the first relationship that they had, that they began to build and should have built through Abraham, their father. And so a devious or a crooked person in this fashion is somebody who would, transfer, who would abandon their first love and divest themselves of that to take on something that's probably more convenient, easier. And so I think this kind of mindset is something, we do find it very easy to do what's convenient as opposed to sometimes doing what's right. And I think that could be a description of this mindset, this attitude, something that we shouldn't have that would be offensive to God in that capacity. But it goes on to say that he is intimate, and intimate is a very strong word. And I don't even recall exactly what the Hebrew word is, but I remember looking it up, and there was no better way to translate or to use that word. Intimacy is exactly what God is the word that should be used to describe what God would have with those that are upright. But the word upright, as we'll look at here in a minute in its use, it does mean to be right. It means to be up straight, to stand up straight, or to something to be erect or standing up straight. And it also, in the dictionary, etymological dictionary that I had, another definition that was in there was faithful to duty. Faithful to duty. And that is absolutely something that means you're upright. It doesn't do us any good to know what the right thing to do is if we have no intention of doing it. As a matter of fact, you're probably in a worse state to know what the right thing is to do and then transpose it for something else and not do it, right? And that's exactly the connection between these two passages. The crooked person who transposes something else is an abomination to God, but God makes his relationship more intimate and becomes, has a greater intimacy with those who are willing to do. And the word, as you see the arrow that I put there for upright and right, the passage of Exodus 15:26, it says, and he said, this is God speaking, if you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right. To do what is right means to be faithful to duty. That's why I put a little space in there, because again, that's the same definition. If you will do what is right in his sight and give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I am your healer.
So first I would need to know that my ways are crooked, and then I would have to do what is upright to fix them, right?
Yeah.
Because if you ask me if I'm in my crooked mindset and I choose not to change that, then I think that's right.
Yeah. I meant to bring up my page, and I didn't. Spare with me a second. I did have another verse written down on my page that was from Proverbs 3 as well, that deals with this first word we were using. So this word for, make sure I'm looking at the right thing. Yeah, so what's interesting, that word lose, I wanted to share this verse because it puts the word lose in a whole other context. So I told you the word lose means to transpose, to transfer, to abandon, to divest oneself of something. And in this verse, which mind you is Proverbs 3, but it's verse 32, says a lose is someone that God, translators say a crooked or a devious person, but it's a man that God considers an abomination, a man who does this. A few verses earlier, in 3:21, the word is also used in the passage, Proverbs 3:21, that says, my son, see that they do not escape from your sight. And what he's talking about comes after, which is comply with sound wisdom and discretion. And the word escape is the same word, lose. In other words, do not transpose, do not transfer what your eyes would absorb and take in. In other words, what do you do when you're looking at something with your eyes? You're focusing your attention. And so really what's being written here in Proverbs is do not transpose the focus of your attention from the things of God that would, comply with sound wisdom and discretion and start focusing on yourself or what is going to bring you something you want, right? Don't take your eyes off the prize, so to speak. Don't take your eyes off of Yeshua. Paul says that at one point, talking about the way he buffets his body and the way he focuses his attention and how he keeps his eyes on Yeshua as the goal. And remember that I shared, and it's in that same passage where it says, Yeshua, it says in most translations, Yeshua is the end of the law. But the word telos there for end means end goal. So Yeshua is the end of those things. So if you have your eyes on him, and you are putting your mind towards creating an end for yourself to where you look like him, and those are the ends you're trying to meet, and you have to keep your eyes on the goal, and the process of getting there is always going to be self-reflective. It's always going to be looking at yourself and evaluating, looking in the law or the Word of God as a mirror to identify within yourself what maybe perhaps needs to be changed. How your outfit, the way you present yourself, the way you dress yourself, how that can be changed. So those few passages were just to give us an idea of what first starts off in Proverbs, how Solomon begins writing in Proverbs about a lose and about relationship. So the next section just goes into a whole section of Proverbs 6 that you guys have heard me quote several times, and I'm actually going to start by reading verse 23 in this section. I'll read the whole thing here in a minute, but I'm going to start by reading verse 23 because this is what you've heard me say several times in here. Verse 23 says, it's in bold at the end of that paragraph, says, "For the commandment, the mitzvah, is the lamp, and the Torah, or the teaching, is the light, and the reproofs for discipline are the way of life." So literally, this is why, I've said over and over that the commandment, each commandment and mitzvah that God created is of heavenly origin and has the opportunity of shining light when we reach out, take hold of it, and activate it. Just like any other light switch, you have to invest yourself in part to reach out, take hold of it, and activate it somehow. Now, of course, the technology of our day and age, think about how much ease has been grafted into the ease of our technology today. You can speak to Alexa, and she will turn on your lights. You can speak to Siri on your phone, and she will make a call or do something else. But notice what is required. Think about this just from a deeper sense for a moment. What's needed is the sound of your voice, which is exactly the initial formation of creation in the beginning. God spoke, and things were as he spoke them. And it's fascinating to me to think about that for a moment, that in our technology and the use of it after all these centuries, that's what we're reaching as a point, is that our voices should be creative. The things that we say about those things around us, the things we say, that's why, to some degree, I'm certainly not a prosperity doctrine preacher, but that's where the idea of what you say will have power in your life comes from. And those who try to make money off this idea will go around preaching that all you have to do is say something and it will be that way. But clearly when Yeshua says, if you ask for anything in my name, right, in my name means put forth the efforts of your life to conform yourself to the same image. And doing something in his name means representing him no more or less than you would represent your own family. No more or less than how you would expect your own children to represent you respectfully in the world. Right? Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 23, you can see that I struck out some of the verses, and later you're going to find that all the verses we first cover are struck out, and we're going to cover the rest. That's what's in these next two pages, is just this passage. But reading Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 23, it says, "There are 6 things which the Lord hates." Yes, 7. Question we're going to ask later, which is it 6 or 7? "There are 7 which are an abomination to him." 7 things considered an abomination to him. Verse 17 goes on to begin naming them. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. Solomon goes on to write, "My son, observe the commandment, observe the mitzvah of your father, and do not forsake the Torah of your mother, the teaching of your mother. Bind them continually on your heart, tie them around your neck. When you walk about, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will talk to you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the Torah is light, and the reproofs for discipline are the way of life." So be mindful of these activities that are first named that you could put. Look at Dave out there. Be mindful of the activities that you have in your life and the behavior patterns that you may form. because they can definitely bring you strife as they create an abomination in your life or towards the presence of God. And we're going to go through this first section and look at each one of the different things that is mentioned. Dave's coming in here, so I'm going to get him some sheets if he wants them.
Hey, hello.
What's up, Dave?
Hi, Dave. Hello, Dave.
All right, man, there's your homework. So you never left, man.
Excuse me.
So we are on page 9. We're going to look at the different things in Proverbs that are described or discussed here as things that God hates. 7 that are considered an abomination to him. Haughty eyes. The word for haughty is the word ruma. It's spelled a little bit differently, but means some different things. And I do have lines on here that I wrote some additional notes, but most of my commentary I had actually typed in after each one of these. But what it really relates to are eyes that elevate something unworthy of that elevation. What causes you to feel a certain way about the things you look at? We've heard the statement, don't judge a book by its cover, but the reason why the statement is made is because we all do it, and we do it pretty regularly. Right? We make determinations about the way someone looks, about where their financial status likely is. We make determinations about the way someone looks and the way their behavior is, about where their spiritual status probably is. And we're usually concerned with, and rightfully, and not necessarily negatively, but positively concerned with people's attitude and behavior and where they may be at in a circumstance. Dave, you want to say something?
You all have that problem, I'm sure. I see it most often when I question somebody and they immediately assume that I disagree with what they said. And I'm not. If I question it, it doesn't mean I disagree with it. It means what?
Question.
You're looking for better understanding.
Yeah. I don't understand their thinking. And if I jump to conclusions about what they do, like you just said, I'll never get anywhere.
Yeah, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. We do need to be fruit inspectors, but to judge and make judgments, we have to be very careful with. We have to be very careful with. We have to be mindful of how we judge, how we absorb the things around us and people's intentions, right? It does make a difference. I have on here, perverting the very tool, our eyes, perverting the very tool God provides us to see things the way they really are by seeing only what suits our own interests. Sometimes the size of a church tells people that they must be certainly doing God's will and walking in what God provides. And entire groups, hundreds of people, have gone to islands and died in cults from drinking Kool-Aid or done other things. So size is not always anything. As a matter of fact, I had somebody once tell me that every wound swells up before it finally breaks open. Every infected wound. So you have to be mindful and careful of not just allowing what you see with your eyes to become the source of what stimulates your thinking, and find, you don't want to find too much pridefulness in something that maybe perhaps, God may have to humble. We find an opportunity to reach certain points in our life, in our thinking, our behavior, where if we don't humble ourselves, God will humble us. So we want to be mindful and careful of that. The second one that is mentioned here is a lying tongue, perverting the use of our organ of connection, right? The mouth, which is where our speech takes place. The mouth has 3 functions: eating, kissing, and speaking. All 3 of which have connection as their connective tissue or the common thread through all of them. And so to lie is to pervert the use of that organ of connection, our place of speech. Shows a lack of acknowledgement of our Creator and our gift and opportunity to give true witness within His creation. Something that we want to make sure that we are not doing. I had on here a note to share something with you. So I'll go ahead and try and share this between the two. I don't have the Hebrew alphabet or anything in front of me, but this is an interesting insight that I learned years ago that is something fascinating to take into consideration. I can't show you the letters, so I can't show you one of the things I'm going to talk about, but basically the word for truth, the word emet, starts with the first letter, the very first letter of the Hebrew alphabet in its spelling, which is Aleph. The middle letter of the alphabet is Mem. And then the last letter of the alphabet, Tav, is the last letter of the word for truth. And so truth, literally, in its spelling, comprises the entire alphabet, and it has a structure like that, and truth is identified usually at the end of things, and best at the end of things. The word for falsehood, which is the word sheker, which is also the word that's used for a lying tongue, a tongue of falsehood, basically, is what it's referred to as. The word sheker, the letters, now notice the word emet, I told you all the letters are in the correct alphabetical consecutive order. So you have Aleph, you have Mem, and you have Tav. The word sheker, all three of the letters, Shin, Kof, and Resh, are all found in the last 5 letters of the alphabet. They're all at the very end. And they're out of order, of the natural order of the letters, the way they're supposed to be. And if you were to look at the way each one of the letters is drawn, the 3 letters for truth, emet, have a very flat base across the bottom. So in other words, they have a stable structure at their foundation. Each one of the letters for sheker, all of them, have just a point, where the letter just comes down and ends in a point at their base. All of them, if they were a physical wood object, would topple over if I tried to stand them up. There's no foundation to them. And this is literally the DNA, and this may sound strange to describe it this way, but the Hebrew alphabet and the words are often looked at as the DNA and structure of these things for the truth of what they are. And falsehood always tries to wait until the end of things to reveal itself. It wants to create deception and mischievousness, right, throughout the whole presentation of whatever circumstance you're going through. And there's no foundation to it if you believe it. You'll find the bottom falling out of it regularly. But truth, which encompasses the entire bit of the alphabet, and goes all the way to the end of things, where sheker, what's interesting is the word sheker, it literally is the last 3 letters right before the end. Literally is the last 3 letters. With the exception that there's one final letter at the end, which is the letter Tav, and interestingly, in Hebrew, the word Tav means cross. And all of the culmination of the building blocks of the tool of speech find their culmination at the end in the cross. But either way, sheker always tries to present itself as near the end of a matter and having all information and presenting itself that way, but it has no stability. And usually the point of this matter is to realize that we should wait until the end of a matter to fully understand truth, and slightly before the presentation of falsehood, and there's going to be instability. So slightly before you reach the end is usually when you're going to see the full presentation of falsehood. Everything's going to be spelled out, everything's going to be told to you, this is exactly the way the truth is, and then you'll still feel like there's one missing component because you're not at the end, although falsehood is trying to present itself as being at the end. And so, being patient and being mindful. Another interesting insight about the Hebrew alphabet, I'll share this and move on, is the letter Pei, which has a P or an F sound. Literally, the word Pei in Hebrew means mouth. And if you remember, I told you guys before that 5 of the Hebrew letters take on a different form when they come at the end of a word. Pei normally looks like this when it's inside of a word. And it literally means mouth. And you see this firm base that's at the end of it. And this has always been said to be that the mouth is closed. And only when the letter Pei appears at the end of a word does it take on this final form and open up. And the insight that's always been drawn out of this by most scholars is keep your mouth shut until you get to the end of things. Because when you open, when you start trying to communicate, and you start trying to share insight, you're going to find yourself in all kinds of trouble. You're probably going to be mispronouncing things because when that letter comes at the end of a word, it pretty regularly takes on the same sound. But interestingly, just like in my name, think about my name. You know how to spell Philip. You hear an F sound, which is a PH at the beginning of it, and then you hear the hard P sound at the end of it. The letter Pei does exactly that. It depends on this little tiny dagesh or little tiny dot that's in the letter. And if you see the dot, then it makes this one sound. If you don't see it, then it makes another. But when it comes at the end of things, it always makes the same sound. And it's just indicative we should recognize that because at the end of things, we should be praising God for the revelation of the light He's shown us. the things that he's revealed to us and made known, right? And having patience to get through the circumstance is always what's gonna get us there. The third thing that's listed here, and I have a couple passages of scripture for us to read and look at, and I want to spend some time doing that. We're near the bottom of page 9. Number 3 says, hands that shed innocent blood. Abominable is the work of hands which cause to flow wastefully the very life force that Yeshua cleansed and protected with great effort. That might sound like a strange statement, but that's exactly what is being translated in the idea of hands that shed innocent blood. The word for shed means to cause something to flow. The same Hebrew word, I don't recall what it is right now, but the same Hebrew word to shed would also be like opening a valve and the flow of water just comes forth. Shedding innocent blood means literally taking something that was intended to contain the life force, which should be free-flowing within the confines of the human body as God has created it and designed it, and opening up an access point to that and then causing it to flow in a wrong way. Right? Clearly, that's what shedding innocent blood would be. And hands that work towards taking something that someone has as a life force or a connecting point between them and their relationship with God and causing it to flow in another direction is a very heinous, abominable act. This reminds me of the 3 wicked sons of Eli, the priest, who have the Israelites coming to them as their priests in the temple, and the Israelites line up as they normally would to bring sacrifices and to bring some kind of an offering that they want to make and sacrifice to God. And the priest, and I'll just go ahead and share all this now since it fits into what I just taught you about the letter Pei. The letter Pei has a numerical value of 80. And years ago when I was writing about the Hebrew alphabet and studied this, I came across a word that has a numerical value of 80, and it was the word mazleg. A mazleg is a 3-pronged meat hook or fork. And in the story of Eli's 3 wicked sons, they were taking this mazleg, this 3-pronged fork, and ramming it into the cauldrons, the pots, or the kettles. Whatever the Israelites would bring that had meat in it to give a sacrifice, they would put it in there. Now, God had already determined in the Torah what portions of meat could go on the altar, what portions of meat belonged to the priest, and what portions would go up and smoke on the altar, and then what the person bringing the sacrifice would consume. And the priests were disregarding all of that. And as the Israelites would come up to have their connection with God and to make a sacrifice, these priests were ramming the mazleg into the kettle, and whatever stuck to the 3-pronged fork and they would bring out, which was nearly everything in the pan, they claimed belonged to them. That's a grievous thing for us to do with our mouths in the life of someone else. And that was my point. That was what God was revealing to me about that, is that the letter Pei, which has a numerical value of 80, is equal to the numerical value of this tool. And if it wasn't for the fact that you know your mouth could literally be a tool that rips apart what somebody would offer and sacrifice to God, until you can come to terms with that in your life and learn how to speak sensitively to them and be able to be sensitive to where they're at, right? That's the pertinence of having this tool of connection. That's what our mouths are, is a site of connection, a tool of being able to connect with those we love and those God brings into our lives to be able to communicate with. So the hands, I've told you guys before, have always been denoted as the site of work, right? Where work is governed or work would take place in your life. And what the Solomon is telling us is considered abomination before God, our hands would shed innocent blood. In Matthew 8, chapter 8, verse 3, here's an example of something Yeshua did with his hands. It says, Yeshua reached out with his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed, and immediately his leprosy was cleansed. The next time you may find yourself reading that passage, try and remember that, again, the opposite of that is what God finds to be an abomination. Reaching out your hands to cause that life, that connection that someone could have to flow in the wrong direction, as opposed to being able to use your hands to perform his work. Yeshua stretched out his hand saying this to the leper. The question that I put, because remember, the leper says to him in verse 2, a man with leprosy came before him, bowed down and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Who asks us if we're willing to do something for them with the work of our hands? And what is our response to them? Those 2 questions I put down to just think about, to try and correct my behavior and to think about in my life. And at the end of the day, this 5 and 6-year-old that are in my life are not verbally asking me to be able to take care of them or necessarily do such and such. And James certainly isn't asking, but the question is still clearly there. and it's still fairly posed, is can you help in this situation, and what are you capable of? And what are you doing? And what is my response? How will I respond to that? So I'm going to read something to you that's somewhat long. The next passage that I have on here to read through is John 15. And I want us to go through that. It shouldn't take all that long. But I want us to do it a little bit different of a perspective. I know you guys probably all read through this passage. This is John 15, verses 1 through 10. But I want to preface this with some facts and some insight, some things to think about as we read through this. One, remember that of all the Gospels, John's, which is believed to have come later, it's believed that John's, obviously his experience with Yeshua came early, but John's, what is the word I'm looking for, not excommunication, but his exile to the Isle of Patmos is where his revelation takes place. And he clearly has a relationship with God and receiving the revelation of things that later when he will write his gospel passage and he will write his letter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, you find in them a much different spiritual relationship and connection than in his age. He's lived, I believe, to be around 80-something, I think, is what was estimated, which is certainly much longer than many of the other disciples. He clearly has a deeper spiritual connection in the things he's writing. And by the time you reach chapter 15 in John's Gospel, or even if you were to look at the other corresponding Gospels in this point in time, the disciples that have been with Yeshua, he's very intimate with. Remember, God is intimate with those who are upright, who are faithful in their duty. He's challenged them. He's given them a lot of insight. He's given them a lot of challenges to go out, to spread the news, to be amongst the Jews, to perform miracles. He's given them a lot of opportunity to really develop a closer, intimate relationship with who he is. And I believe at this point in time, they would clearly know and understand what his desire is and what his commitment level is to our Father in heaven, to the keeping of his commandments, to walking in and to observing and keeping the things that they'd all grown up with and been accustomed to all of their lives. And all of the memories and foundational points. Now, for us as Gentile believers, we don't necessarily have some of the same foundational points of that relationship with God. We start as Gentiles with Yeshua and understanding who he is, and we come to faith with him. Right? And we begin to understand and learn about God, and then we maybe look back towards the Torah, and we are either taught or we believe to have relevancy in that, and we approach understanding it better and having a relationship with it or not. But the Jews are very different. You want to say something, Dave?
When you say the Jews, who are you talking about?
I'm talking about the Jews.
Well, the question is, most of the Jews today are not where you're saying thinking they are.
I know, I'm not talking about the Jews today. I'm talking about the disciples and their time frame when Yeshua is talking to them.
Okay. But not the people, and some people call the Jews the leaders.
So the best way to describe it would be to say the Jews who believe. Okay?
In Yeshua.
Well, no, not necessarily them. Any of the Jews who believed in and had a relationship with God and even understood what the Pharisees would try and teach before even the coming of Yeshua. We're talking about the foundational elements of those who believed, who were considered Jews, offspring of Abraham. Their foundational elements are not having a relationship with Yeshua and trying to understand who he was as Messiah because he's just come. So their foundational elements are having had a relationship through Abraham, understanding the stories of Abraham, understanding the stories of Joseph having gone into Egypt, understanding the 12 brothers, understanding Jacob, Esau, understanding Isaac, that whole relationship. And they very specifically have as one of their foundational memories and points, because this is really part of the crux of all of Judaism, is the relationship that was received at the mountain. Coming out of the slavery and captivity of Egypt, arriving at the mountain and receiving the Torah, receiving God's instruction about how to live.
But they needed that.
These are some
They
of
had
the,
been 400 years, and they had absorbed all the Egyptian religions, and their religion was primarily that of Egypt.
so these,
So they needed that.
this is the cornerstone of their religious approach. This is some of the cornerstone of their relationship and the things that the people were aware of, right? So as they've observed, as the disciples around Yeshua have observed his life and absorbed from him the teachings, the practices, the thinking, the instructions, the parables, as they've spent time with him, they are probably at a very intimate level by the time, this is my point, by the time you would reach this passage in John. And Yeshua is going to begin having some very intimate, close relationship and discussion with them about their relationship with God and with him. My phone closed. Let me open it back up. So think about it and remember from some of this perspective that I've shared, what the disciples are accustomed to, what their thinking would have been as he begins speaking this passage to them. He goes on to say in John 15, verse 1, I am the true vine. My Father is the vine dresser. Yeshua is the vine, is the Messiah from him, who expresses the production of fruit as God designed it because he is the vine dresser. So the fruit that would be produced in his life is best grown and produced when it is cultivated through the hands of the vine dresser. So when God has established some plan for how to grow a vine, and the branches, as you'll soon see, that spring forth from it, staying within the confines of what he's described is how the production of fruit is best to take place. Okay? Now, this isn't just necessarily a parable of something to make a connection. It's much deeper. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so that it may bear more fruit. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going around the discussion very much about this point, but I will tell you that I have had a few people in the years approach me who very strongly believe in the existence of hell, and this is a place of destruction for those who do not do what God says, come to me and talk to me about this particular passage that says, every branch that does not bear fruit, he takes away, because there's other passages in the Scripture that say that they are taken away to be burned. But there's something very synonymous, if you study the Greek in this passage, which you should find and should make much more sense. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. Now, I'm not going to show you on the screen. I should have prepared to do this, but I didn't. The word he takes away is one word. It's the word iro in Greek. And the first time that the word iro is used in Matthew 4, verse 6, is Satan speaking. And it says, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will give his angels orders concerning you, and on their hands they will lift you up. That's what it means to take away in this passage. So Satan himself knows and understands that this particular action, where this Greek word is used, means to lift something up, and he remembers the psalm and challenges Yeshua to listen to him and to be prepared to walk in something fleshly and throw himself down because the angels will lift him up. And Yeshua knows better than to walk in the flesh. What is really being said, and this is every good gardener, not every gardener, but every good gardener and vine dresser has a desire for the plants within his keep to grow. He doesn't have a desire to produce dead branches or even cut off living branches just so he can throw them in fire. Because it's really only dead branches that are some form of fuel for a fire. Living branches, while they can burn, do not really create such the same kind of fuel source. And so in this passage, in every branch of me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. What it really means is he lifts up. Because every good gardener knows that if you can get that plant that is struggling to grow closer to the source of nutrients that it needs, which is usually the sun, it's going to grow better. And this is precisely what the passage means. It's not as if Yeshua's desire is people who aren't bearing fruit are just simply whisked away to be thrown in hell and burned up. The point is we lift them up and get them closer to the sun. If you have a circumstance in your life where you're not producing fruit the way you should be, or you have someone in your life that wants to produce fruit and is struggling to do it, help them get closer to the source of nutrients. That's the point.
We could also be lifting them up out of the dirt so that they're not trampled down.
Yeah.
Our God is a consuming fire.
Every component of that relationship is about lifting them up so that they can be productive, not so that they can be burned up.
Lift them up is not to put them down, right?
It's
You
to
put somebody
elevate them.
down, I could put you down, and what good would that do?
It's to elevate them.
Elevate me, sort of, in your eyes.
Dave
If I put
helps,
you down,
Dave helps to make a good point that I've been stressing a lot over the last few weeks, and that's our having a sensitivity. For you to be able to lift someone up who's down, you first have to recognize that they've been brought low, that they've been put down. And what level of sensitivity do you have to that situation or the people around us? And if we can identify that and see where somebody is brought low, even if it's psychologically or if it's mentally or if it's in some capacity emotionally, if they're being brought low, what can you do to get them up, get them moving, get them going, and feel better about just life in general or a circumstance?
if you said something and I thought it was wrong, the first thing I say to you, that's wrong, that's not gonna help at all. Is it?
And
Probably not.
See, that's called putting them down. Hey, that's wrong, what you did.
if we go to John
Be careful what
15
you say.
and get to verse 6, that's what I've been looking at.
Uh-huh.
And it talked about, if a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch and is withered.
Hold
Yeah.
on.
And that word withered is very important. And men gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. Now, I got into that withered at one point in time, the withered hand. And when I looked this up, it went to the same place, which means that a man is not being productive and he needs to be restored back into productivity. And the fire is what does that. The fire burns away. The fire does lift you up, but usually when it gets hot enough, you want to get out of it. And I'll leave it right there.
Well, he's just jumping us ahead a couple of verses, and I did want to try and get through most of this, and our time is going quickly, but I want to get through the next few verses, and I tried to establish a lot of the things that I did for you at the beginning, because I want you to understand that our foundation is not going to be the same as the foundation that the Jews listening at the time, the disciples listening at the time, would have had when they would hear the very next words. In verse 3, Yeshua says, "You are already clean." And so let me back up and reveal to you again. The second half of verse 2 is to say, every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes it so that it may bear more fruit. Okay? So every good gardener knows that as soon as a branch starts producing fruit, you have to cut away certain areas of the branch that would take away some of the nutrients that the fruit needs to grow and become much more of a better fruit. Okay? So sometimes for your own fruit production in life, God has to snip away things you might want to hold on to. You have to be willing to yield yourself to the hands of the vine dresser to be shaped and formed the way he would determine, not the way you determine. Okay? Because the vine dresser knows precisely what is best. Now, the same word that is there for prune is the same word that is in verse 3 when he says clean. Okay? It's the exact same word. So what Yeshua is saying is you are already pruned because of the word which I have spoken to you. Now, there is all kinds of things that we, in our different foundation of believing, as commentaries and as scholars, think that Yeshua means when he says, because of the word that I've spoken to you. But the people, the listeners of his day, would have understood that to mean one very specific thing. God speaking audibly to the ancestors at the mountain. This is the pivotal point. This is the pivotal relationship that God has established in their faith and in their understanding. And when Yeshua says, because of the word I've already spoken to you, remember, he has an extremely intimate relationship with his disciples already. They already are looking at and having that close, intimate relationship with him, and they are seeing God in him, recognizing the power of God in him, and seeing him as equatable to the one who spoke to them at the mountain, in that mountain of relationship. And he goes on to say, and this is where all of this language will make sense then. I'll see you tonight, man. This is where all the rest of the language will make sense if you have that foundation. This is what he would mean when he says, this is what God gave at the mountain. Yeshua is equating himself in that same passage. And then he goes on to say, remain in me and I in you, just as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, but must remain in the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. God is not physically present and was no longer, after the experience of the mountain, no longer physically present with the Jews who believed in his existence. After Yeshua's crucifixion and resurrection and spending time with his disciples, he was no longer physically present with them. The way that we maintain being in him and abiding in who he is no different in either circumstance. What God gave as an instruction to live your life successfully in the land of salvation is the same in both occurrences. With the exception that at some point, the Pharisees and the teachers of the godly things, so to speak, I'll put in quotes, began teaching self-aggrandized, self-righteous ideology about what was self-serving for them, as all of us have a capacity to do. And Yeshua came and lived the life of Torah beautifully to show us how and to show us what it would look like in doing so. And so keeping and observing and having that relationship with God is no different. Our expectations are no different. In or out of his presence. He goes on throughout the rest of this. I'll just read the rest of the passage. I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in him bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. Remember, John at the beginning of his gospel says Yeshua is the Word. The Word was made flesh and came and dwelt among us. If anyone does not remain in me, he is thrown away like a branch and dries up, and they gather them and throw them into the fire and they are burned. This is why I made the huge emphasis that I did, because some people take this to mean that simply stating with your mouth one thing but living different actions in your life means you're connected. And that's not the case. You can say things with your mouth and then not live your life accordingly. That is possible. And a lot of people don't seem to realize that. They think that when they say something with their mouth and then feel good about something inside, that means they're accomplishing it, and they're not the same. Yeshua is the Word of God made flesh who dwelt among us. And if we are remaining in him as we do not have or see his physical presence, it is because we are keeping and doing what that Word says. If you disconnect yourself, and remember, this is what I was going to share, Yeshua refers to himself as the way, the truth, and the life. And I showed you guys months ago, I should probably get the verses and actually put them on the wall in here. The Torah, God's Word, is also referred to as the way, the truth, and the life. And if you are not observing, you are not connected. And where we fail to have connection, those, as Andy was bringing out, those areas of our lives can wither up. And there's no connective tissue, there's no connective source even with our neighbor in those vital areas. And so that is what makes you become a fuel that is usable in who is God as an all-consuming fire. You know, as we come into his presence, we either see him as an all-consuming fire that purifies and burns away the chaff that should be, or we find areas of our lives that should not have dried up that end up getting burned up as well. This can be problematic, obviously. Just as the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. These things I have spoken to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made full. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. greater love has no one than this, that a person will lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. Do you think you have many friends that you could say that to? Imagine going to work with the people that you assume to be your compatriots and your friends and looking at them and saying, you are my friend if you do what I command you. We don't hold that level of title or that level of relationship. But the one true God who walks in, Yeshua, who walks in what the Father gives him and teaches us how to do so, is able to say that, and we can understand the relationship of love behind it.
Isn't there a lot of human beings that insist you do that, Joe?
Now, certainly.
Dictators.
Oh, they even have a name, Dave? Dictators.
No, they do.
Yeah, that's what they are. I mean, they may not be a dictator, but we've all had bosses that we thought were. So.
I'm thinking of some clips of the Kim Jong-un, or however you say his name. And every time he comes in a room, they're required to like clap super fast and jump and cheer and scream, and so many women in the room have to faint. Otherwise, they all get thrown in prison. You know.
Yeah, I haven't watched much about North Korea, but I watched a video thing, I don't know, a couple weeks ago or something, about 40 minutes long. I couldn't stop watching, all about what the lifestyle was like over there and what the people were to endure while the family lived, however they chose to live. And it was pretty in-depth. I mean, it was really pretty in-depth how close they got and viewing and filming some of their eating habits and patterns and being right there, being allowed to even film that. I was surprised by that. How much of it was just, right there at the tables. And I guess when you become that pompous and you do begin to think of yourself as the God that you tell your subjects they're to look at you as, when you begin thinking of yourself that way, you can become so pompous that you start letting the world see, thinking that the entire world should now worship you the same way that you force your subjects to. And it was just, in this culture and generation, I've never seen anything like that. I've never experienced looking at another human being that way. So to see him just gorging himself and, looking at his environment that way it's hard to turn away from. It's hard to believe that he would be so infatuated with himself, but it happens. The mindsets we can prepare for ourselves can be abominable, and we have no clue.
But he did what the Bible said. Listen to his mother and father. They're the ones that told him that he was.
That he was, and they set him up, so he honored them. So, I guess I go back to this as we had talked, I don't know, it's been a while, about how sometimes you can start out with good intentions. Like you can start out and do something with good intentions, but it can be, and I don't want to say perverted, but it can be twisted over time. And it's the same thing. It's like you can start out with all the best intentions to volunteer at some place or to give your time over here, and then just it slowly over time it morphs into that which is no longer good.
Yeah.
It's not about you, it's about Yeshua. Don't get it the other way around.
Well, but the problem is a lot of times it starts out as God, for God, and then it becomes for you. So it's that's a slippery slope that you find yourself in often.
The only productive answer I found in my own life to that, as it happens on a daily basis and regularly, is to always be self-reflective and to try and have some level of awareness, and then hold yourself place yourself in a light of accountability. Try and talk to other individuals that will hold you accountable about the decisions you're making and where you're at. Once you see either in yourself or in someone else, someone who refuses to do those first initial steps, to be self-evaluative, to look at the decisions they're making, to even have or entertain conversation about it, they no longer hold themselves accountable to other people around them. They just make a decision and they go off to do it. Once you begin to see that, there is an infection that has reached a point where it's causing a fever. That's the truth. There's a sickness that's under the surface, and it needs to be adjusted. And the only way that it gets adjusted quickly, gets treated quickly, and begins to get into the healing process, the fastest anyway, is when you are able to be self-evaluative, realize it, be sensitive to it in yourself, and start going after the medicine that you need in a relationship. As Dave was talking about, the key is recognizing that you don't want to flip-flop the relationship of, well, God told me to do this, and everything I'm doing and every decision I'm making is for him. And a year later, everything you're doing and every decision you're making is in God's way because you're still doing the same thing he wanted you to graduate out of 6 months ago and start doing something else, and you're in a complacency of ease. This is teaching that we need to do in here at some point. It's been coming up a lot in different video series we've been looking at, but Dave was here last Friday. We're watching a teaching series from Grant. And a couple of years before he retired from Beth Coon, and I don't know if God gave him this years ago or if it happened right before his retirement, but as he was teaching through the Torah portion, he came to the passages in Deuteronomy where the battles, I still can't remember the other king's name, but there's King Og and another king, and their names are paired together like 16 times throughout the end of the Torah. And basically the Israelites have to pass over the Jordan, through the Jordan to come into the promised land. And the last two kings that they have to wage war against are these two kings. And before they can enter into the promised land and live there productively, they have to get through the battle of these two kings.
Two of the families of Israel are positioned over there, across the river, on the east of the Jordan.
Okay.
And there was two kings over there,
Yeah, hold on a second.
Same
Probably not.
Wait,
Yeah, Bashan. No. Og, the king of Bashan, and I can't find the other king.
Where's the map?
I can't remember the Rephaim, and of course it doesn't have his name. Sihon and Og.
Yeah.
Sihon and Og. Okay, so basically, I'm just going to paraphrase the whole thing, but this is a teaching that needs to be really developed as much as Grant did, and something we really need to think about. Sihon, the name Sihon, all of the things that he is king over, and a lot of the place names and the people involved in the war, all basically come down to representing and meaning, and Sihon means the place of logic and human reasoning. And the word Og means round or cake. And one of the brilliant insights that Grant draws out about Og is referred to in Jewish mythology as not only one of the giants that was created between the angels and the women, but Og is said to have been a giant. And one of the evidences of this is that the Torah goes out of its way to describe to you one personal point about King Og, and it's his bed. And it describes his bed as being 9 cubits, which is roughly 18 feet. And now, when you read that, and you're all fantasizing about giants, and you want to understand all this mythological stuff, you're going to get lost in that, and you're going to get lost in and miss the biggest point that Grant drew out of this, which is, of all the things to talk about, why tell us about the one place that you want to have the most ease and comfort in your life? Your bed. And some people who become bedridden at one point literally find the bed nearly like a prison for them, unable to remove themselves from it. And the ease and comforts of life can do specifically that. They can become a prison for the mind. And you can get lost in ease and comfort. And the two main battles that the Israelites have to have regularly in transferring into the land of promise are a battle of human reasoning and logic and ease and comfort. And you have to learn to get yourself outside of those two things. You have to learn to get yourself into a place of not always thriving in ease and comfort and not always trusting in your own logic and human reasoning. And those are battles that take place every day, spiritually, clearly. Now, there were certain battles that were raged, there were certain territorial areas, and Grant's point about some of this, I haven't studied the whole thing out myself yet. I'm somewhat fascinated too. But each one of the place names will also, the meaning of those words will also lend itself to an understanding of how much of a battle those things can be and how much of a struggle it can be in certain areas of life. This is really the point of producing fruit, right? You've got to battle through having your own human reasoning and logic. Well, clearly God would want me to come over here and do this because of this reason and because of that. And so that makes sense to me, and so I'll be willing to do it. Well, if you're only ever to walk in obedience with the things you understand, you're probably going to get about 10% done what God would have you do. Because a good portion of life is going to be things you don't understand until later through hindsight. And yet you become responsive and you yield yourself to the hands of God. The next one we'll talk about at the bottom of page 9 that he describes here is a heart that devises wicked plans. And the word for wicked and devises here, the word for devises, and notice I put it in the word harassment. The word devises is the word harass, and I'll bet you that's where we get the word harassment from. It also, the word harass, also means to plow. It's another way that it can be used. And so when it's talking about someone who devises wicked plans, it's someone who is willing to bring destruction to things that are sitting, and for what purpose? Plowing the earth can be good when you're looking to sow seed and create the production of fruit and the growth of crops. But plowing the earth just for the sake of tearing things up, especially if you start doing it in your own yard and you don't measure anything or you don't have the gas company come out, could cause you and your neighbors all kinds of issues. Right? So what is the intention of devising, what is your intention behind devising just plowing into something? Are we plowing with intention or not? Why is the heart, and this is something else I put to think about for a moment, remember, this is a major key, I think, to understanding something. And it's the Hebrew word for heart, the word lev. It doesn't just mean heart, it also means mind. And think about how easy it is for this is considered the higher world, from like the throat and the connective tissue here. The neck is the connecting point between the higher world and the lower world. Imagine that the heart, the word lev, can mean both mind and heart. And how easy is it for your mind and heart to be employing its actions in the lower world instead of in the higher world? And why is a heart that's leading from the lower world? Our heart and our mind do need to be in concert with one another for us to understand what we're going to go after. Because whatever you set your mind to thinking about is usually going to be what's contained in your heart. Whatever it is that's in your heart, you're usually going to be employing your mind and your lust towards, and you're going to be moving in that direction. Right? So that's why you need to find love and appreciation in studying God's Word and looking at His commandments, His instruction. Because when you find an appreciation and a love for that, that's what you'll move towards. So don't let the heart, which could live in the lower world, be your only leading source. And I think we'll share the top one more off of the top of page 10, so that way it won't be difficult for us to get to this. Because this is an insight I learned from Rabbi Akiva Tatz that I just love. This is just a fantastic, this will go pretty quickly, but this is just a fantastic insight into Hebrew words and Hebrew terminology. Number 5, at the top of page 10, is feet that run rapidly to evil. This is something that's considered an abomination to God, is feet that run rapidly to evil. The question I ask is, which way are your feet pointing? Because here's a brilliant insight to understand. He makes a little bit of a sarcastic point to say that in Genesis 1:1, we hear that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And so we think to ourselves that this is a denotation of 2 different locations, 2 different places, and this is all that it really means. That in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we think of one above and we think of one below, and that's it. But in the root form, and I had never heard this before until I learned it from him probably a year and a half ago. In the root form of these words, they mean something entirely different. The word roots, which is where we get the word eretz, meaning earth, the word roots means to run. It means to be moving rapidly in a direction, which is what running is. And the word sham, or the word shem, which is where we hear the word hashemayim, which means the heavens. You guys have also heard the word, or the name, that's for God's 4-letter holy name. You've heard the term Hashem. Hashem literally in Hebrew means the name, because out of polite consideration, we are meaning God's name.
I don't know if it's polite consideration or not.
For some it is. He describes it as actually has nothing to do with it. So you are right in some contexts that some don't look at it that way at all. Rabbi Akiva Tatz's point is to say that not pronouncing Yud-Hey Vav-Hey has nothing to do with trying to be politically correct or polite. It has to do with the fact that any finite methodology that you use to try and describe what is infinite is by definition defining it as no longer infinite and making it definite. You understand? So it's literally, by definition, to try and pronounce his name, which is infinite, to try and pronounce that is to use finite packages of words and demote it down to something that is lesser than what it is. So to actually try and pronounce his name is something that isn't accomplished because we are capable of it. And
I've never heard that explanation for it.
I actually like that.
I do have a respect for that, and I appreciate it. I never heard it either. I'd always heard it as, we don't know how to do it properly. We don't know how to do it correctly. We're not exactly sure what the pronunciation is. And his claim is that, although that is a component of it, the fact of the matter is we are finite beings that do not have the capacity of doing justice correctly for what would be the pronunciation of that, and it makes sense. But either way, my point is this. You've heard the word Hashem, which means the name. Shem doesn't just mean a name. Shem is also the word for there, T-H-E-R-E. In the beginning, God created, and there is the origin of location. Like when you use there, when you use the word there, what you're saying is the origin of location I'm talking about is there, right? In the beginning, God created all the theirs that there ever would be, and the only source of origin there that there ever will be. And he created the running towards it. That's what it means in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created all the important theirs there ever will be, and the momentum that you could use to get there. And the question that I asked in this point is, which way are your feet pointing?
That's really what.
Because whichever way your feet are pointing is clearly what you're running toward and what you're moving towards. So where are your feet pointed? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created all of the locations you could find yourself in, and he created the ability to get there quickly. And in what direction are your feet pointed? Again, this is probably one of the greatest self-evaluative questions I could ask myself about what my motivations are. I make decisions in my life, and I make decisions about things all the time that I believe God is telling me to do. And sometimes I don't know whether or not that was actually God telling me to do that until after the results have come in, and I tally up what those results were, and I see that a portion of it may have been, and a bigger portion of it was my own will and what I want. And I don't ever want the fear of making bad decisions or selfish decisions to paralyze me and freeze me up without being able to make decisions. I need to combat that as well. But at the same time, I need to be self-evaluative enough to know that I have the capacity to make decisions that are self-serving and what I need to not do so. Right? In other words, you have to sometimes look down and see what direction are your feet pointed. Because the whole time your feet might be pointed.
No, thanks.
The whole time your feet may be pointed in a particular direction that you are not, that you think you're moving in and you're not. So I thought we would get you most of that, but we will definitely finish it up next week, and then I will get some more material, and we will get back into Matthew 24.
Is that page 11?
That'll be page 11. As soon as I said